All of the victories of Obama's legacy in foreign policy have been the victories of diplomacy over war. All of Obama's failures in foreign policy is where he was pushed or he chose to use force instead of diplomacy. Every one of them failed. He failed in Iraq, he failed in Afghanistan, he failed in Libya, he failed in Somalia, he failed everywhere he used force. Because you know what? You can't bomb terrorism out of existence. The US has been at war with terrorism for 15 years, and terrorism is doing just fine. Terrorism is thriving. Because, as President Obama told us over and over again, if only he had listened to his own words, there is no military solution. There never was. And so when you say there is no military solution, so I'm going to send 17,000 new troops to Afghanistan while we decide what to do, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. When you say there is no military solution to terrorism, to ISIS taking over territory in Syria or in Iraq, so we're going to send special forces and drones to bomb, it doesn't make any sense. And what a surprise. It turned out he was right. There was no military solution. And the people of Iraq and Syria and Yemen and Libya and Somalia and Afghanistan are all continuing to pay the price for it. The global war on terror, and I've got to say it's one of the few things that I appreciate about George W. Bush. There's not a lot of things I appreciate about him. But there's one thing. He called a war a war. He didn't pretend it was something else. He called it the global war on terror on the day after 9/11, which, you know, 9/11 did not change the world. It was 9/12 that changed the world, when George Bush announced that his response to this horrific crime against humanity would be to take the world to war. That's what changed the world. That's what put our democracy at risk in a way that the actual bombing, as horrific and tragic as it was, did not do. And on that day, when he said, we're going to take the world to war, we're going to launch a global war on terror, the GWAT was one of those great acronyms, you know, that really sounds so evil, GWAT. The global war on terror was exactly what it was. When President Obama was elected on his second day in office, he sent a memo to the White House staff and to the Pentagon, and to the, I don't know who else, the State Department, a lot of other agencies, and said, we would appreciate it if you would not use the term global war on terror. That is not our intention. We do not plan to make this a global war. We would prefer that you call it overseas contingency operations. Now, you want to talk about an Orwellian term? You know, an overseas contingency operation. To me, that means when there's a naval ship steaming around somewhere and a typhoon blows up and a lot of people in a fishing boat are blown overboard and the Navy cruiser goes and rescues them. You know, it's being the global savior of the kittens in the tree. Those are global contingency operations. These are not contingencies. These are wars. They budget for them every year. They budget for them every year. So when you don't call it a war, you can mislead a lot of people. The people you can't mislead are the ones whose children are dying under the bombs. They know it's a war. They don't care so much what you call it. But they're the ones who know exactly what it is. So we need to be very careful about recognizing what have been the failures of foreign policy in the past and thinking through how do we make sure it doesn't keep happening in the future. This is our challenge. Now, part of that means looking at what does it mean when the wars come home. Some of that has to do with money and cost, and I'll get to that in a minute. Some of it has to do with the lives of our soldiers. The way the U.S. has been waging war in recent years has cut down dramatically on the number of U.S. soldiers that are killed. That's a good thing. But the problem with it is that when that happens, it usually means because more civilians in the places we're bombing or attacking are getting killed. That's not a good thing. That's not an even trade. American lives are not worth more than Iraqi or Afghan or Syrian or Libyan or Somali or any other lives. American blood is not worth more than any of the blood of anyone else. But one of the other things that happens, those wars come home. We know it comes home in the bodies of young soldiers who have been so damaged, either they don't survive at all, or they survive with horrific injuries, or they survive with mental and emotional damage that is so profound that they are killing themselves at rates higher than ever before seen in the history of this country. We all know the statistics, that more veterans have killed themselves, died by their own hands after coming back from these wars, than the total number of people who died from the US in Vietnam. This is powerful reality. But there's another aspect of what happens when these wars come home. You know, to convince people that it's okay, that it's legitimate, that it's necessary, that it's a good thing to kill people in countries around the world, you have to demonize them. You have to make people in this country, especially the soldiers, certainly, but also the soldiers' families and the people who they work with and the people who see them in the street, all believe that the people that they're killing deserve to die. That means massive demonization. That means racism, and it means, in terms of the wars that are being fought now, it means Islamophobia on steroids. Islamophobia is not a new reality in this country. It has a long and sordid history. I can remember it rising at the time of the Iranian Revolution in 1978-79, when there were t-shirts with the Ayatollah Khomeini's face on the t-shirts and crosshairs, like a target. They were very popular. They were sort of funny. That was when this round of demonization began. Then we saw it with Saddam Hussein, when the US wanted to go to war against Iraq after it invaded Kuwait in 1990. It was a little bit tricky because Iraq had been our guy. You know, maybe violent, yeah, maybe he had biological weapons, yeah, we knew because we provided the seed stock to build them. Oops, we maybe shouldn't have done that, but yeah, we did. So all of a sudden we have to make him the bad guy. And suddenly he's demonized straight out of central casting. And he's not a particularly religious Muslim, but he's a Muslim. So Islamophobia plays a huge role in the demonization of Saddam Hussein. And of course now, we see the Islamophobia coming home. So when we hear about the Muslim ban, remember the 7 countries that were going to be particularly punished by the Muslim ban? Of those 7 countries, the US was already bombing 5, had troops stationed in 1, and was sanctioning the last. What a coincidence. What a coincidence that the Muslim ban's targeted 7 did not include any countries like Egypt or Saudi Arabia or the UAE, where Donald Trump's empire has major investments, hotels. Now, maybe that's a coincidence. I have no evidence that that had anything to do with the choice of countries. Maybe it's a coincidence. What do I know? But I would also say that maybe it's just a coincidence that that useless tactic, which doesn't work no matter what countries are involved, no country should be punished for what some of their individual people may have done. If you want to look at who carried out the attacks of 9/11, they didn't come from any of those 7 countries. They came from Egypt and Saudi Arabia and the UAE. I'm not proposing that those countries should be punished for what those 19 individuals did, not by any stretch of the imagination. But to claim that that's somehow how you prevent terrorism and leave out the countries from whom there is a link also doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The notion of demonizing entire populations because of what somebody from that country might do sometime in the future. I mean, collective punishment is the stuff of dictatorships. It's the things we protest. It's the things that are not supposed to happen in this country. And in our cabinet of generals and the gazillionaires, and the gazillionaires is an important category here, because the other way these wars come home is all about money. Now, we all know about the military-industrial complex and how influential they are, how powerful they are. And that's really important. That's really important. Because, you know, I don't usually believe in conspiracy theories. But I will say there's something about the military-industrial complex that I've never been able to figure out as anything other than some kind of conspiracy. Here's the deal. What we call the military-industrial complex, which is this whole range of giant corporations that produce weapons, all kinds of weapons, the avionics that go in the planes, the bombers, the computer programs that make dumb bombs, smart bombs, all that stuff. These massive companies like Boeing and McDonnell Douglas and Raytheon and all of them. They started becoming wealthy and powerful and influential right after World War II, when there was a period when war production was providing a huge amount of jobs and pulling the US out of the Depression. That was true then. It's not true now, but it was true then. When they started emerging as major national corporations, they did something so brilliant, so insidious, that I've got to think they planned it out. I mean, I have no idea. But here's what they did. They made sure that the actual production of all this stuff was scattered across the country. Completely inefficient. Right? The efficient way is you produce everything in one place so you can put stuff together and have it all in one place and not be wasting fuel and time and workers' costs and whatever on transporting parts from one place to another. They did the opposite. They spread it out across the whole country, with the result being that every single congressional district has 1 or 100 companies that give 10 or 30,000 workers jobs producing that stuff. And what does that mean? It means that however anti-war a member of Congress might be, she's not going to be willing to vote against some production line of some particular bombing program because there's jobs in her district that depend on it. And if she gets rid of those jobs, it's a gift to the other party on the other side and her opponent in the next election, who will say, you want to bring back to Congress the Congress member who got rid of all your jobs? I'll protect your jobs. I'll vote for wars that bring those jobs right back here, right quick. And it's worked like a charm ever since. So it's a really hard challenge, right, to deal with that. And when we look at the other side of the economy stuff, the military budget of our country is equal to the next 8 countries together, including the big military spenders, like China, like Saudi Arabia, like Russia. It takes the next 8 to equal what the US spends on the military in 1 year. It's an obscene number, $568 billion. Billion, gazillion. Who the hell knows what that even means, right? But that number doesn't even include the cost of taking care of the veterans of these wars. That's another $180 billion. It doesn't include the cost of the nuclear arsenal. That's another $20 billion that's taken out of the energy department. And here's the kicker. It doesn't even include the cost of war. Remember what I talked about, the overseas contingency operation? They have their own budget. It's about $68 billion this year. And on top of that, Donald Trump wants to add $54 billion more. And where's that money going to come from? It's going to come from stripping the Environmental Protection Agency by 30%, almost a third of the EPA that keeps our water pure, except in Flint, keeps the oceans clear, except in the Arctic. I mean, there are limits, obviously, but imagine if we had 1/3 less. That's what he's threatening. Where else is it going to come from? The budget of the EPA is pretty small. You're not going to get $54 billion. The State Department, 29% slashing of the State Department budget. Talk about war over what? Diplomacy. If you don't have money to hire diplomats, you damn well better hire some more soldiers because you're going to be at war. That's what happens when you send special forces instead of special diplomats. 15, I think, $billion out of Health and Human Services. Virtually the entire foreign aid budget. That's what he's stripping to get to $54 billion more. Now remember I said I don't know what a billion looks like. I don't even know what a million looks like. But here's what it means. Just here in Syracuse, just this year, for the military budget, you know, the one not counting veterans, not counting the nukes, and not counting the wars, just the base budget, Syracuse is spending $84 million of your tax dollars this year. $84 million. Now, I don't know what that means. Here's what it means. If that money stayed here in Syracuse, instead of going off to war, you could pay for 8,000 kids to get into Head Start for a year. You could pay for 6,509 veterans to get health care for a year. You could provide 4-year scholarships for 3,113 university students. Or you could provide 88,000 houses with solar power. What makes us safer? Healthcare and jobs and infrastructure, or going to war around the world and making people around the world hate us? That's why we need local action. We need cities and states to be taking action to oppose the $54 billion now, and when it gets reduced to only $20 billion next month, which is pretty likely, to say, yeah, $20 billion is outrageous too. Not to say, oh, we're relieved it's not 54. To say, yeah, $20 billion is outrageous, and indeed, $568 billion to start with is outrageous. We have a lot of work ahead. As an anti-war movement, we have a lot of work to do. And it's going to be hard, and it's going to be a different time. We need to do some of the things we've always done: protest in the streets, write our members of Congress, sit in their offices. Yeah, we've got to do all that. But we have to do more, and it's going to be harder, because it's different than what we've usually done. Our movement, the anti-war movement, the anti-nuclear movement, is not the tip of the spear right now in terms of what US policy is all about. There are other movements that are rising. I would say the Black Lives Matter movement, the environmental justice movement, and the movement to protect refugees and immigrants. Those are the movements that are on the rise. The LGBT movement is on the rise. We need to be in those movements, working with those activists, not just trying to get them to come to our events, come to our protests, but go to their protests, number one, because they're important, not because it's a chance to pass out our leaflets, but because it's important. We're at the climate march in 2 weeks because the climate march is important. There will be an anti-war contingent, but we're there because climate is crucial and climate justice is our demand. But it also means the climate movement needs to be thinking about the question of what $54 billion more to the military is going to do to their work with the EPA. They know about the $54 billion. They don't necessarily know that it's being stripped out of, I mean, they know it's coming out of the EPA. They don't know it's necessarily going to the military. We need to be the ones to provide that information, not because we have to get them into our movement, but because their movements need that stuff. It strengthens those movements. And you know what happens when we do that? It stops being their movement and starts being our movements together, a movement of movements. That's what we need to be working towards. So when we talk about resistance, that means resisting everything on one level, but it also means linking all of the problems that we face in this new political era. When everybody went out to the airports, what an amazing thing that was. Because it was people who are not necessarily people involved in the movement to protect immigrants. It wasn't just the immigrant rights folks. It was everybody. Everybody concerned about what our country was becoming. That's what made it so powerful. And you know what? We saw the impact of it. It was partly about they had to remove the first Muslim ban. Yeah, then they came back with Muslim ban 2.0, and now that one's on hold. But why are they on hold? It's because judges were prepared to be brave. Now, judges in this country haven't had to be very brave the last couple of generations. Maybe once in a while there's some political pressure from something. But as a class, judges had it pretty good. You know, you have to be fair, you have to uphold the Constitution. And frankly, I was worried. I didn't know if our judges, who haven't been tested, were going to meet the test. Well, you know what? They did. Most of them. Not all, but most of them did. And you know why they did? It's because they saw all of us at the airports, outside the White House, on the steps of the Supreme Court, every day saying, our country welcomes refugees. We demand that refugees be brought here. We're not going to grudgingly say, oh, well, all right, we'll take, maybe 10,000, which Germany was taking in an hour at the height of the refugee crisis. There is an extraordinary, catastrophic refugee crisis underway. In Jordan, where there was already a water crisis, that suddenly has to deal with 1 million more people to provide water. In Lebanon, a tiny country which now is facing 1 out of every 3 people in the country is a Syrian refugee. Imagine, the equivalent would be if suddenly, within 6 months, we suddenly had, I think it would be about 110 million Canadians in the middle of the United States with nothing but the shirt on their back, and sometimes not even that. Needing food and medical care and housing and school for the kids and emotional care for the damage caused by the traumas they had gone through. Would we be as generous as the people of Lebanon? Or Turkey, where there's 2.5 million Syrian refugees. Turkey's a pretty wealthy country and they've got water, but that's a big thing to carry. We don't have a refugee crisis here. We have a racism crisis here. That's the difference. We need to demand refugees be taken care of when they get here. And when we talk about sanctuary cities, it means not only we start with the traditional definition of sanctuary, protecting people who come here without documents because they're desperate from being deported, protecting them from ICE raids, making sure that our police do not collaborate with ICE raids. All of that has to continue and get stronger. Syracuse is a sanctuary city. It needs to strengthen that. Put it in writing. When you get the next city council, maybe they won't be so great. When you get the next mayor, maybe they won't be so great. Get it in writing. Make it a law. Make a campaign to put that in writing. But make sure it goes beyond that. To say sanctuary also means protecting our Muslims who already live here from being harassed on the street or being beaten up on the bus, because that's happening. Hate crimes are happening. Make sure that sanctuary also means that the Black community and the Latino communities here are not facing police violence. It's not only ICE that are the problem, our own police can be problems too. Sanctuary means all of that. Sanctuary means all of that. It means expanding it, and it means broadening it, and it means consolidating it to make sure that it remains what we stand for. And in doing that, we build those links to other movements, the movements against Islamophobia, the movements against racism. They come together around protecting people who are at greatest risk right now, in the streets of our communities. 50 years ago, when Dr. King made his extraordinary speech at Riverside Church, it was a moment when we understood, I think many of us for the first time, what it meant to link issues. Dr. King was excoriated for that speech, as you know. Why is a civil rights leader coming out against the war? You're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. Every newspaper of the 127 newspapers that editorialized about his speech the next day, all but one condemned him.